Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury.
Electrifying.
Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon Podcast. How are you? I hope you're all doing very, very well. We are here for another episode of Scouted to discuss our boy, our captain, Martin Ødegaard. George, I don't want to speak for us both, but I think that was our best episode of Scouted. That's what I think. That's what I think. You guys tell us in the comments. You can go check it out for free from the link in the description. We did an full hour looking at clips of Martin Ødegaard. Looking at, we'll come to a sort of disclaimer in a second, but we're looking at what he could be, what he is right now. Maybe we feel like we've lost him a little bit this season, his strengths, his weaknesses and stuff. And I just think it's it's a very good conversation with, actual evidence and clips and stuff and breaking down moments and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely worth go checking out. You can check it out for free, as I said, from the link in the description on Patreon. We are here to talk pros, cons, what we learned from the clips, answer questions, and so on and so forth. Before we do, I think it's worth a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't want to spend too long on this because it's it doesn't matter that much. But we're not here to kill Martin Ødegaard. I think there is. George is here to kill him, but we're not here to kill him. I think there is, it depends how much time you spend on the internet and so forth. And there's some people are probably completely oblivious to these conversations, but there are obviously conversations where you can talk about players, and we want to be constructive. We want to be the same we would be with every single player. I think, Georgia, maybe you'll talk about your pillars in a second, but I think there is, certainly for players, in my opinion, in Martin Ødegaard's category, we have to be prepared, in my opinion, to have conversations about, okay, where can they go? Where can they be? And not just look at the captain's armband and say, well, that's it. That's his maximum at Arsenal. We can always improve. And I think I really like these conversations because they give me a fresh take on the team. But yeah, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. And I think, I look at teams in very different ways. Like, you can be a pillar of a team, but also, not be somebody that I feel can change the sport in their position, which is my biggest delineation between the Martin Ødegaard. Like, I don't think he's quite elite personally. I don't think he will be a reference attacking midfielder that in 20 years time, we're going to go back and say, Martin Ødegaard changed this about the sport, like Iniesta did. Even Cesc Fabregas, if you really want to talk from an Arsenal perspective and that specific Arsenal lens, that is an example of a player, but that's okay. Like, there's not going to be many people within that category. There's going to be maybe 2 to 3 within a team. Like, for Arsenal, for me right now, there's only William Saliba, Declan Rice, and Bukayo Saka that fit for me in that category that can change their position, and we will look back on as a reference player for Arsenal in their position. And then it's about, okay, understanding the pros and the cons, and from a con perspective and speaking to the people that maybe are a little bit more against Martin Ødegaard in general, understanding that criticizing a player for what he isn't, especially profile wise, for example, this guy can't run in transition. He makes the wrong moments in transition. Okay, fine. But that will be something that Martin Ødegaard can never fix. Your anger should go to Mikel for not recruiting a profile to go into there. And then for somebody that loves Martin Ødegaard, lastly, I would just encourage you to hear the constructive criticism about where those actions really occur, because this isn't about removing the player, but it's actually about maximizing the player. And if we're moving towards a system in which we're going to be asking him to do things that he's not going to perform well in, then ultimately he's going to be a player that struggles individually more. So it's about trying to find and isolating those exact moments that he excels, where, when, and how do we see that more often?
And it's super interesting because we discussed almost him being in a similar position in some ways to Gabriel Martinelli, in the sense that there's some people who maybe are frustrated with him, but also there's a lot of people who say, but there's situations he's not always in the right situations that suit him, and where the will comes from to fix certain players, but not. It was kind of an interesting conversation, certainly. So check it out. Let's talk what we sort of learned from the clips. Let's do pros and cons and so break it down like that, and maybe just go back and forth in terms of what we feel. I think let's start with pros. Martin Ødegaard, as we said, is such a top player. Why don't you give us your pros, the things that you absolutely love about Martin Ødegaard?
You thought I was frozen for a minute. There was a joke there. Very deadpan. It didn't come off. But look, so Out of possession, he is the best player in the team for understanding the triggers within our press and understanding when to go. And I think people use that term loosely without actually analyzing the impact of that. So this is a player that, for me, really understands where a loose ball can occur before it happens. And, his structure and understanding about when to squeeze, how to squeeze is top. He's a phenomenal presser, not a good dueler. This is one of the big distinctions that I talk about within the press, because he actually doesn't win the duels. It's the harass and harry that he is unbelievably top at, and understanding when to go. So out of possession wise, that for me is the huge part to why our press is so brilliant. And so that has to be said. Then as far as in possession goes, this is a player who undoubtedly has a high level of technique, but 360 vision. No matter where it is on the pitch, whether you're talking about the first phase, the middle third, or in the final third, this is a player that sees the openings. That's something very difficult to teach. You're never going to be able to really teach somebody to really maximize that unless they have that special eye, and he does. He can spot gaps. He does it really well in pockets. One of his best qualities is offering himself as a position in the middle third and executing passes from the middle third or in build up. He is one of the best players in our squad at doing that. And then lastly, as far as really quickly on one of the finishing points of a pro that I really like, when you look at Martin Ødegaard with balls coming from the left, his finishing is phenomenal. 8 or 9 times out of 10, even if he receives it in a poor area, if he's finishing across his body, or if the ball's coming to his favored left foot, he finds solutions brilliantly. It's just when it comes from the right and he's forced a little bit, but then we're getting into cons, there are some issues. But as far as the pros go, those for me are the big three that I look at Martin Ødegaard as being potentially one of the best, if not the best in the squad at some of those skills.
Yeah. Only a couple of things to add, really. I don't know if you've seen this meme. I was just showing this on the screen, so apologies if you're listening on audio, but I don't know if it can if it flips or whatever. But it's basically the idea that, job A, you win the ball. Job B, you put the ball in the net, and there's nothing really going on between, just ignore it. Martin Ødegaard, in terms of getting us up the pitch, is world-class. World-class. He's unbelievable in terms of understanding where to stand, when to jump, when to drop in to make that space for a player, to maybe hold on to it just for a second to allow that player to make that run and then push that ball in. The amount of times we get up the pitch, and it's because of Martin Ødegaard dropping out and being that play, it's unbelievable. The inventiveness of him higher up the pitch in terms of those flick balls around the corner, against Leicester, we're speaking after the Leicester game, his sort of accuracies and execution wasn't great. But in terms of the ideas, the vision, as you say, those sort of Trevella balls or the flip balls around the corner or the balls over the top and stuff, he sees that before anyone else on the pitch. And we don't have that. And even deeper, we were looking at sort of what's the highlight reel of Martin Ødegaard. There's a goal that actually he scores, Erling Haaland scores against Norway. I'd recommend everyone to go and see the Martin Ødegaard assist. We do not have a player in our team who can do that. He is unbelievable. He genuinely, and he truly is. And I think in certain games, it's interesting looking at the data because he didn't actually profile particularly well this season in terms of key passes and chances created overall. But there are certain games where you see it in these stat pads and it's Squawka coming out with Martin Ødegaard created the most chances since Herbert Chapman in the 30s, whatever it is. There are games when Martin Ødegaard is unplayable. Moving into the cons, and I'll sort of let you go after me. I think one of the big issues, and maybe this is the meta conversation about Martin Ødegaard, is his role suited to his skill set right now? And I think no. And then it's coming down to, could Martin Ødegaard do better? Could Mikel do better to support him? And then you come into, well, why do we give him that? Why do we allow that conversation with Martinelli? Whatever. That's another conversation. But I think right now, in terms of his influence centrally, he is a little bit too limited for me to give him too much time centrally to influence the game. His best influence comes, ironically, in the horseshoe, dropping out the block, playing the passes through. When he's centrally, he can get bullied off the ball. That happens to him. I think sometimes he doesn't always make the right decision in those areas. And finally, I think Arsenal are looking for a bit of thrust centrally into the zone 14. Someone who can choose Jamal Musiala dribble, take the ball, Phil Foden turn and have a shot. Morgan Rogers carry through that area. We're crying out for that. And a lot of the time, Martin Ødegaard is in those zones and we don't see that. We don't see the thrust and we don't see someone who is going to win the game in that area. That's not who he is. But I think it does frustrate people, and I hear that his limitations in that area and the amount of time he spends in that area, and therefore in his future use, I want to put him in areas where he can thrive a bit more. But those are the sort of the cons I think we looked at in the scouted. But I'm interested in your take as well.
Yeah. One thing just to reiterate that was kind of said in the pro, this delineation of him being a top presser but not a top dueler, I think is really important, especially as far as the press goes, because he's going to harass and harry the ball almost like a shepherd. Like a dog shepherd guiding sheep into the pen. He's not the one that's going to defend the sheep from a wolf. Okay. He's not going to win that duel for you, but he's going to be the best person in terms of shepherding that press to where it needs to be. And, but it does relate to a con, because part of the reason he can't be the bite is because he lacks physicality under contact. And especially for me, when there's a guy right at his bum. Okay, this is a player that has to recycle or pass back.
Bunda.
Bunda. And he can't. He's got the inventiveness to turn. Okay, but he doesn't trust his athletic ability in transition to carry in those big distances. Which brings me to my next con about the transition point that you talked about. Far too often in transition, we find that he recycles the ball when he could carry up the pitch. And we do have numbers and we have an opportunity to exploit and turn those turnovers into shots. He doesn't have the physical capacity to keep up with the carry. And so as opposed to getting rid of it in a poor pass, he chooses to recycle, keep the ball, and try to get us up the pitch slowly. But it kills our ability to get to the final third quicker in doing that. And then lastly, when you're talking about the final third in general, which isn't the case when he's in the middle third, he has an ability to be extremely one-footed. It forces poor decision-making in terms of sometimes hanging on to the ball too long. As well, there's moments, even when he's in space, his execution of his final ball, not the pass before the pass, but his final ball, for some reason, isn't consistent with the tempo of pass. Those chips over the top to Trossard in the Leicester game. There's moments when he's got space, he's got a couple seconds to really release and nail that pass. He doesn't do it. And there are times in transition I find that he passes and he overhits the pass quite a bit. So these moments about a final output are annoying in that sense for a person of his technique. But when you see that on the left, it actually isn't the case. Like, he doesn't rush his action. Well, sorry, he has to rush his actions because his one-footedness forces angles that mean he must make a decision quick, but he executes them. And he actually does brilliantly there. So the only thing is the weak foot usage is poor. There's times that he's going to trivela his pass because he just refuses to use his right foot, even in a simple wall pass. And so from a con perspective, it's about understanding, okay, if I find a player that has his best moments there, but also if he does have a final action, 9 times out of 10, it's from the left. It's understanding where it makes sense to have that body and understanding where to maximize him.
Yeah, and we'll discuss that as we come onto the tactics board. So let's get that up. Obviously, there's conversations about Zubimendi, and we'll talk about that in a second. And you know, we're talking about where Ødegaard's best, and we'll see that in the pitch. Before we do, though, I do think it's worth saying something we brought up in the scouted, and I keep mentioning this Martinelli thing, and I want to kind of blow it out a little bit. Where we've discussed pros and cons, and maybe where Ødegaard hasn't quite hit the heights. I think maybe also something we need to talk about is, firstly, players are allowed to have bad form, and I don't think physically he's at his absolute best level right now. And sometimes that happens. You look at the injury situation, whatever. So that should be said. There's a world there, and players just have bad seasons at times where they just make the wrong call. Sometimes it's okay.
Yeah.
But I think maybe there is more of an appetite from Arsenal fans to try and fix Martin Ødegaard than there is with certain other players, and I think that's okay. And I think it comes back to and even with myself, it comes back to, do you like the talent or not? And I think for me, someone, Martin Ødegaard, with that level of vision, with that level of technique, with someone who has created so many magic moments, I feel, for Arsenal over the years, who is our captain, really I come back to it. And I think I'm imploring him to go away and, you know, come back and define us. And it would be unfair not to bring up Martinelli and say, but what Martinelli has shown us a level at certain points in his Arsenal career, he is not being absolutely used in the maximum way, and the same as Martin Ødegaard. But I'm sort of more willing to move away from that talent. And I think for some reason, I am more willing to go there with Martin Ødegaard. And really, I guess what I'm saying is it comes back to how much you like the player. I think this is the thing with Martin Ødegaard. We all love this player. We want him to work. So we're having these conversations to saying, how can he get better? How can he get better? But I do think it's interesting that in other cases, that doesn't happen.
No doubt. Like, I mean, the funny thing that we're really talking about is two players to different degrees. Like, people say, well, Martin Ødegaard has for sure been better than Martinelli this year. It's not the point. He's on a down year after having a year in which he was probably one of the best midfielders in the league. And then Martinelli had a season in which he was one of the best wingers in the world and almost set a record. And you're talking about two
as well.
Yeah. And you're talking about two players that in the right context, in the right environment, have shown that they can be the best in the world at their role, right in the moment. So, and then you're talking about a down season in which conditions aren't perfect. You know, he's coming back from injury. He's been poor for a long time in certain moments in terms of getting that rhythm. He's not as bouncy maybe as what we saw in that season. Those are all form and physical things from having an interrupted season. But so the context isn't great. But so what's the solution? For me, my mind goes to fix Martinelli, get him inside, get him central. That will fix. You will see a different person. Martin Ødegaard. I don't think it means banishing the boy. You know, move him to the left, and you know we'll talk about it here in the tactical board a little bit. Why I feel that the left could be an opportunity. So just to walk everybody through this, you know, this is kind of just a first choice 11 that we might see potentially. And yes, I'm putting my boy Miles.
We see Miles. Yeah, we see Miles.
But really, this whole conversation is going to be a little bit more about what's coming in. And let's assume that this Zubimendi point is going to be the case. And so we're going to see something like this. I don't know who the left winger will be, but let's ignore that for a moment and talk about the issues here. Because Zubimendi in these roles forces a Martin Ødegaard. It's going to be too crowded to come in here. Why? Calafiori loves that underlap. So he'll have that space. He has some opportunity to be on the outside, so Martinelli can come inside. But again, you've got both of these two players that basically want to be here and stay in the pivot and be passers. Okay? So that's going to be the conundrum in which you're going to have somebody who's more of a true 10 in this instance. And sometimes we might have instances where Ben White's a little bit high and things will shift and then we'll move everybody around. You're going to have moments in which right now, Zubimendi will be shifted a little bit over more, but with Ben holding the width and, you know, kind of Declan up here, Martin Ødegaard is going to be in areas where Saka is a little bit more involved. And, you know, he's going to step on his toes. And it's about finding somebody who can thrive in this area. And does he? That's the issue with a Zubimendi, because he takes him out of the role in which if Zubimendi wasn't playing, this is what made the right-hand side so brilliant. You had this, right? And our left back would join in the pivot. And this is a rotation we've tried and trusted. We saw him have his best, you know, season as a midfielder in a role like this, right? So that's the Zubimendi question of it all. I don't know if you quickly want me to go into the solution, but I don't want to take you out of this conversation.
I think in terms of where his absolute, as we discussed earlier, his absolute best moments come for Arsenal is dropping out. And I think we can discuss moving him over to the left, potentially. I do also want to go to the out of possession point, and maybe that's sort of the next point after the left. But maybe let's talk about him on the left. What does that look like, even with his Zubimendi? Okay,
so with a Zubimendi, you're talking about something a little bit more within this area, and Declan Rice becomes a little bit more of that Henderson role. And with kind of Martin Ødegaard on the left.
Please don't use that word. Please don't use that. Declan Rice and Henderson should not be in the same sentence.
Okay, how about a Gini Wijnaldum? Does that help you?
I like that. I'll buy that.
Okay, so in terms of fixing kind of that portion, Declan Rice carries this zone, and these are both kind of your lateral shuttlers, if you will. And, you know, Kai Havertz can be the tip of that kind of box midfield, and we've got wingers that are looking to make those runs here, right? And depending on where the ball is, and I'll just get the ball to make this a little bit easier to track for people that are seeing. So if Zubimendi's got the ball here, if we're trying to work on the left and Martin Ødegaard is within these zones, not only can Calafiori be out here and we can find slip balls out wide, but even centrally, which he has a brilliant ability to do in the pockets. That is an option. Another one is even, when our winger stays wide with Martinelli and, Calafiori makes that underlapping run, feeding somebody inside, that can come from Martin Ødegaard. And from the left, I think he sees these balls brilliantly.
You made a point earlier, which was really good around he's forced into making those passes because he can't check back. When he's on the other side, he can, if he's on his right foot, he's constantly looking to check back onto his left. But when he's here and he's on his left foot, he literally doesn't have that decision. So he makes earlier calls and slips players in. Also with the runners on the left-hand side, rather than maybe more ball to feet players, I think that I think that is the answer for me anyway.
Yeah. And so I think one of the big things too, by the way, is when Havertz could make a near post run. Okay. And you've got
Isak. Thank you.
Sure. And so when Martinelli does arrive here, this arrival into the left half space, and Calafiori can drop in to like control the transitions. Future, it looks great because he can finish this way brilliantly. Like when Martin Ødegaard is attacking the balls from this area at the top of the box across his body, this finish in, or even when he's got to finish near post, like he's a top finisher in those zones. However, when he's arriving from the left, the only thing that I will say, this cutback scenario, or actually let's keep Saka here because we want him inside, but the cutback scenario from Ben White out into this area for Martin Ødegaard to finish in this is going to be a problem. That's something that he doesn't do as well.
Yeah, for sure. Final thing on the tactics board, I think. Can you just put us in our sort of nominal, to use a Rohan phrase, out of possession press? Because this is something, I suppose, when we're talking about moving Ødegaard around, maybe put Partey back in just for this season, just to talk about this switch. Normally, Ødegaard is on the right-hand side. And I think the reason that's been happening is in order to lead the press, generally, Ødegaard has had to be on that side. I think the reason we generally press teams from our left to our right, or their right to their left, is for a number of reasons. I think, as George is showing, because goalkeepers tend to be more right-footed than left-footed, so you're putting them on their weak foot, and because I think we have our better duellers in terms of the Ben Whites and the Salibas and Sakas on that side. I think that's two of the main reasons. You talk, though, about potentially if Ødegaard is on the left and has been switched over sort of more permanently in possession, about this switch, about Ødegaard being on the left and with the benefits that it could bring, especially now we have Calafiori and Miles.
Yeah, and I think so. The first point is actually from a goalkeeper to make that ball, that raking pass from his right to left is an easier pass than on his strong foot bending a ball out to the right. And so what I wonder is, Havertz has the same pressing mind. You're not losing somebody that can't harass and harry. He can make this bending run and really contribute to pressure to force the ball out wide into here. Now the problem is, not currently, but when he's in these areas, I mean, mate, have a look at some of these duelers. Like, I mean, if you want to move Miles in there, I have no problem. But I do think Calafiori is actually slightly better in these areas. But especially the big thing is that press, that thrust from fullback, right? Because Ben on this side does that brilliantly. That's why we do it. And I think this actually stands a little bit more where Miles is a better dueler than Calafiori. But as far as the thrust goes and the pressure within that, Martinelli's brilliant at it. Declan Rice, one of the best in the world, and then Calafiori up here. And, Gabriel's no slouch. So if we're going to be guiding the press to something a little bit more like this, and, you have Kai Havertz pressuring here, I don't see where you're losing running power, especially if you just switch things, right? And you have, Calafiori drop in, and we go back to what is tried, tested, and true. The only difference is, Martin Ødegaard in these zones, he's the one making that harrying press, and Kai drops in a little bit more. So once he does that,
it can make us more unpredictable in the press as well. I think as we move off the tactics board, it can make us more unpredictable. I think it really can. And it's only a little switch, really. It's a couple of yards, and it can be variable, and we can maybe become more unpredictable because of that. We don't have loads of time, unfortunately, to come to questions, but we sort of had one big one. If you want to join our Discord, I also give priority to Discord members who are YouTube and Patreon members as well. So if you want to join our Discord, make sure you sign up for our Patreon or our YouTube membership side. We had a lot of questions, one from Ash, one from Tipsy, one from Zaid Mib, one from Keenstar, all in different ways, asking about Ødegaard's shooting. If we are going to use him in a different way, if we are going to expect him to be there to receive cutbacks, and he does time his arrivals really well, we have seen that in the past when he's not the person expected to provide that thrust. I do worry about his shooting, but I think off his left, for me, I think this relates far more back to his physical state at the minute. When we were watching those clips and looking at him against Burnley last season, when we were watching him against Sheffield, I don't see a player who can't shoot off his left. I really don't see that. And we've seen that, the United goal or whatever it might be. Yep. I don't see that. For me, it's about timing of arrivals, about where he is, and just getting a little bit of confidence and rhythm in front of goal. Even two goals would convince you, Ødegaard's back. I don't think this is some massive, huge crisis of confidence or anything. I just think it needs a couple of goals, needs to be in the right positions. And we've heard Mikel talking with Rice, and Rice has said that Mikel's spoken with with Rice and himself to say basically he wants more arrivals into those areas, and I think that's completely fair. But yeah, just as a sort of close in terms of thoughts on his ball striking, to put it that way.
I think it's very unfair for people to say that he doesn't have good ball striking. The decisions on shots, fair criticism for me. Delays decisions sometimes, doesn't release. As far as going on the outside, he will never be Ethan against Leicester, who can go on the outside and use his weak foot. We'll never do that. And it's a problem. It's not something that I enjoy seeing. But as far as his ball striking in isolation, he's got very good technique. He generates great power, and it is in a specific area, though, and that's the thing. And that's why I've preferred him from the left, because when he's arriving onto his strong foot and he's finishing across his body, he's very good. He's very consistent at doing that and receiving those cutbacks. So I think the only trouble is he can't generate separation for a shot as well in tight areas like in the box. That's something that he does need to find, and that's why the arrival point is key, because if you restrict him, this is actually why I like him on the left that people don't talk about. What is our left central midfielder asked to do? The right is constant. Arrive into the box, attack the last line. So in terms of some of those tweaks, we're not changing much. This has always been my biggest frustration with the whole why can't he move left point. Yeah. Because there's a lot of game model stuff that gets sustained, and it actually improves a lot of the stuff for Martin Ødegaard specifically, not just his shooting, but even from the left for me. The fact that he's so one-footed and angle biased actually force his flaw to release, which is a flaw. But then when he does release, it's good, especially when you start seeing him in those zones off the left. It's very good. And it will improve another player, Martinelli. Look, the only thing that I'll end on with this whole thing is there are ways to fix any player. I am an ultimate optimist in every Soylent. Yeah, well, I'll find a way. And I brought up the Martinelli conversation previously, and I think it's a good place to end on, because it's talking about the future. What do you do with a player if you have these concerns? What do you do with him moving forward? Right? And my question becomes, well, it depends on how rigid you feel the team needs to be, and whether or not you feel that you can have a player that can move. I mean, I look at Ethan Nwaneri and Saka, and I feel like that's a partnership waiting to explode. Yeah. But similarly, a Martinelli and Martin Ødegaard partnership is a partnership I believe is willing to explode.
Yeah, that slip ball could become iconic.
Yeah, it could become very, very deadly. And so from my perspective, it is just about, okay, I hope that Mikel becomes a bit more rigid. I hope that we see that Martin Ødegaard, there's going to be games that, okay, he may not be guaranteed to play. Newcastle, Crystal Palace, a physical mid-block are games in which he struggles. So I would like the 10 in that position to be somebody that's more of a carrier, resistant to contact, and has a little bit more output base. Simple. Yeah. That doesn't mean that I'm going to banish him off into the wilderness and be a Spartan who must come back with some wolf pelt in order to be welcomed back to the village. Okay, it's not some weird issues in terms of that. He's a player that's very important to the squad. But
I think that's your best ever analogy, George. That might be your best ever analogy. That's a good place to finish. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion, but I suppose we're both saying there is so much left for Martin Ødegaard on this team. I think we discussed in the clips, we haven't necessarily discussed here, is like his story at Arsenal kind of maybe makes him a little bit less able to move, and maybe we feel more threatened about that. So yeah, it's a really fascinating one. It's going to be really fascinating to see how we reshape the midfield. We've got two guys who are aging out, and we've got two players who we've spawned this season who, let's face it, are midfielders and need to be in those zones. So where Martin Ødegaard stands is going to be super interesting, because he will be there. And we will be there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching. If you like this sort of content, make sure you subscribe and all that good stuff. As we said, you can check out the clips. So I plugged it enough. I think I have. You can check that out. But we also got loads of other stuff on the YouTube members and Patreon side, which you can go check out. Thank you, George.
Thank you, good sir.
Thank you for the analogies. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. And thanks for keeping it Arsenal.